Good afternoon, everyone. Or good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Welcome to our program today entitled The Top 5 HR Challenges Facing Nonprofit Employers Right Now. My name is Jeff Tenenbaum, Managing Partner at the Tenenbaum Law Group here in Washington, D.C. I am your moderator for today's program. I will be introducing our extremely talented panelists in a few minutes. This program is a joint program brought to you by the Nonprofit Advisory Board and FAR, formerly the Finance and Administration Roundtable. We're excited to bring this program to you today. As I said, I'll introduce our panelists in a second, but first, I want to turn it over to FAR's Executive Director, Donna Schiffley, to say a few words of welcome.
Jeff, Donna. Thanks so much. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank our audience for being with us today. This is a really important topic, obviously, otherwise you wouldn't be here, but we're going through such unusual times as we continue to evolve, and we've got a lot to deal with. I want to thank the Nonprofit Advisory Board for putting this panel together, and always, Jeff, you're always great to work with, and you always have such great material. So thank you again for doing this. For those of you that aren't familiar with FAR, I hope you will check us out at the far-roundtable.org site. We are a small nonprofit organization that actually is focused on HR, IT, and finance in the nonprofit arena. So look for us. We'll be glad to have you join us, and I'm always glad to answer questions. So Jeff, I'm going to pass it back to you because I know this audience wants to hear from those experts.
Thank you, Donna, and thanks very much to FAR for your co-sponsorship of today's program. So let me introduce our rockstar panelists here today in alphabetical order. I've had the privilege and pleasure of knowing all four of our panelists for some time, some even longer than others. And also had the advantage of working with all four of them on a very regular basis. Two of them as clients and two of them working with clients of mine. So I have a deep insight into how good and talented and insightful they are, and I'm excited about what they have to bring to the table today for what is a really important topic. First, Beth Chris Smith has been with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the nation's largest conservation grant maker, for almost 20 years. In her role as Vice President of Human Resources, Beth is focused on building strategies and initiatives focused on solving business and people challenges. Her expertise includes employee selection, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Beth has demonstrated success in working across the organization at all levels, developing trust and building effective partnerships. I've had the privilege of serving as outside counsel to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for over a decade now. I've worked very closely with Beth and excited about what she brings to the table today. Sarah Hensey is an HR consultant with TPO, a management and human resources consulting firm. Sarah has 20 plus years of experience in business operations, most of her experience focused on human resources. Her core expertise is in compliance, compensation and benefits planning, policy and procedure development, and training and staff development. Sarah has extensive experience in senior leadership roles in a wide variety of small and large organizations, including government contracting, technology firms, and more recently, nonprofits and associations. She's excited and comfortable managing direct reports in large structured organizations and collaborating with teams in matrix organizations. In addition to obtaining her SBHR and SHRM senior certified professional certifications, Sarah is a true colors facilitator. I also had the pleasure of moderating a panel that Sarah was part of for the Nonprofit Advisory Board last year. She was terrific, and I have no doubt will be today. Jane Sohm-Schlosser is the principal and founder of SOS Association Solutions, a consulting firm specializing in human resources exclusively for associations. Jane is an experienced association executive, having served as senior vice president, COO, and deputy executive director in small and large associations before establishing SOS, which she did in 2014. SOS offers a full range of HR consulting and organizational development services. that deliver cost-effective HR solutions. Jane partners with CEOs to help strengthen their human capital strategy through talent acquisition, development, and retention. She has led numerous strategic human resources initiatives focused on transforming associations and aligning talent to the organization's business objectives. Jane works very closely, essentially as an outsourced HR director for several of my clients. I've known her for quite a while. She's extremely talented and has a lot to offer to our panel today. And finally, Patricia PJ Trudeau is the Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer for the Association of Corporate Counsel. She is a coach, consultant, speaker, connector, and trainer. PJ has been working in HR for over 20 years in global leadership roles that have helped to foster workplaces consistent with the values and mission of the organization. Has been a strategic partner who proactively engages with all levels of staff to ensure employee engagement, provides coaching and development, and promotes a culture of shared values and teamwork. She has been invited to address organizations throughout the country to discuss topics such as the future of work post-COVID, sexual harassment, employment law, ethics, and has written for and appeared in various publications within her industry. She's a member of ASCE's Finance and Business Operations Professionals Advisory Council, a SHRM Senior Certified Professional, and is certified in mental health first aid. One of our topics here today, thanks to PJ's suggestion. I have the pleasure of working with PJ and Association of Corporate Counsel as outside counsel. I have for probably a decade now. PJ is a real rock star there, and I know has a lot to offer to today's program. So without further ado, getting the introductions and welcomes behind us, it's time to dive into our program. So when the panel and I kind of put this program together, our first call, we kind of brainstormed, what are the big HR challenges that your organizations and the organizations that you guys work with are facing these days. And we came up with a bunch of great ideas. Everyone kind of threw out some great ideas. We kind of combined, consolidated some, and boiled them down. We wanted to come to 5. For those of you who know me, I like a top 5, top 10 list, and this one seemed to be appropriate for a top 5 list. There are certainly many other topics we could have covered, but what we broke it out is 5 different topics. Kind of back to the office, remote work policies and practices, the Great Resignation, the mental health of the workforce, and Zoom fatigue. And so those are the 5 topics we're going to be talking about here today. There is obviously some overlap and intersection between them, and you'll see some of that today. But we are going to get through all 5. I've asked our panelists to keep their answers as succinct as possible so that we can try to cover as much material and hear from all of them on all of these different topics as much as we possibly can. Some of it is going to be illustrative, where you're going to hear what their organizations or their clients' organizations are doing in ways that are successful, that are working, that are overcoming challenges and hurdles. Some of it is just going to be their thoughts and opinions on different things. But in the end, hopefully you're going to walk away, all of you on the webinar today, with a lot of really concrete, specific, helpful suggestions on how to deal with what are some really significant challenges that all organizations are facing. Every organization is facing these days. We have a terrific, by the way, roster of individuals on the webinar today. You guys who are joining us from a wide, diverse variety of all different types of nonprofits and associations, not just in the DC area, but from across the country. And we're going to be cognizant of that and make sure we're not making anything too DC centric or whatnot, as sometimes we, including me, have the tendency to sometimes do. So let me start out with Beth at NFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And I know I've worked and consulted with you guys on these issues for many, many months now. It seems like Beth, you and General Counsel and Executive Director and I have multiple calls to kind of brainstorm these issues. And it's been a moving target, right? I forget when your original game plan was to bring everyone back to the office, but it's been a moving target. So right now, at this current date of April 7th, tell us right now, what is NFWF's game plan for approaching a return to the office? And of course, we say this during a pandemic that seems to continually be a moving target. Just when we think we're coming out of it, right now in DC, we're facing seeming like kind of a new outbreak, at least to a certain extent, of COVID, yet without the same kind of restrictions in indoor mask mandates that were in place for much of the pandemic. And all of it has an effect on workplace reopening plans. So tell us, how is NIFWF approaching the return to the office as of April 7th, 2022?
Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it has been a moving target. We initially thought we were only going to be out for maybe a month. Over 2 years later, we're now currently slated to be bringing everyone back to the office in person on April 18th. With that, we have expected everyone to be fully vaccinated, including a booster. We've been using our ADP system to track that compliance. And we are following mayor's orders as we're based in the District of Columbia. So we are not expecting people, you don't have to wear a mask when you return. You will be fully vaccinated. And, we're planning ways to welcome people back to the office because we have received some concerns about coming back into the physical office. Obviously, our plans are very flexible so that if something occurred, we have to change, we can change. But right now, everyone will be in the office beginning 3 days a week. And then we'll be focusing and evaluating things from there.
Beth, a follow-up question, and I know because I've helped you with a lot of this without, of course, getting into any specifics, at least certainly no names, but I know you have dealt with some, they're typically referred to as exemption requests, although it's not really an exemption, for both for medical and religious reasons, kind of exemptions from your vaccination requirement, or what technically is a reasonable accommodation request in connection with the vaccine mandate. I don't want you to talk through the specifics of the different cases that we've dealt with, but generally, how have you been dealing with these? Has it caused any friction or problem? Any kind of words of wisdom for others who are dealing with this? Because as others return to the office, and as others, not all are going to have vaccine mandates, but for those that do, the law requires, because of the Americans with Disabilities Act and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, you have to make reasonable accommodations for those that have, for medical or sincerely held religious reasons, cannot receive a COVID vaccine. If that is well established, and then that's a difficult question and issue to deal with, then you have to make a reasonable accommodation for that individual, so long as the accommodation still allows the individual to perform the essential functions of the job, and so long as it does not pose an undue burden on the employer. So can you tell us a little bit about how you've been dealing with these issues?
Yes, I mean, it's been truly on a case-by-case basis, but we have been making those accommodations. What we have instituted is that if for whatever reason they're unable to have the vaccine, they're required to provide weekly COVID testing to me, which I evaluate and review. And then it is anticipated that when they return back to the office, because we've required all of our workforce to be vaccinated, they will be expected to wear a mask while in the common areas of the office.
Okay. And just one more follow-up question on the testings. I've gotten this question from a number of clients. It's fairly easy these days and fairly inexpensive to get home tests, kind of rapid home tests. But rapid home tests, there's no way, at least the ones that I've seen and heard of, there's no way to prove that home test was taken by that particular individual, right? It's not like when you go to a facility and then you get a report by email, or printed or whatever that has your name on it. And so presumably you are requiring those who you're making the reasonable accommodation for to not just do a home test and bring in, the actual test, kit showing the color on the thing or showing a picture of it, but you're actually making them go to a facility each week to get tested. Is that how you're doing it?
That is exactly how we're doing it. And they send me that test by email encrypted. I receive it. I acknowledge acceptance of that, but it is very clearly done. It's a PCR test. So,
and that was my last question. Are you requiring the PCR test?
Yep. We are.
Okay. I'll just open it up to any of the other three of you to talk about either PJ, how ACC is dealing with these issues, or Jane or Sarah, if you're seeing clients of yours that have like a solid game plan that's maybe a little bit different from what NIFWF is doing, or any good insights or suggestions on kind of the return to the office construct?
So happy to chime in. So consistent with what Beth said, I have a couple of clients who are doing something very similar. They're requiring the proof of vaccination. Some are using ADP, some are just using the acknowledgement, where they send the acknowledgement form to the employee and they have us and HR validate that we've seen the card and that they're ready to return to work and they've been vaccinated and boosted. And we track it a couple of different ways, whether it's through ADP or Excel or whatever. But bigger than that is back to your question earlier, Jeff, where the employees are reluctant to think about coming back to work if they don't know everybody else is vaccinated. And so we're trying to create an environment where we want people to come back to our work environment and we want them to feel comfortable and safe, because as an employer, that's our obligation to make sure that they're safe. And so we're putting systems in place that hopefully support both the requirements for the employer as well as for the employee.
Jane, do you have any clients who are not imposing a vaccine mandate on their workforce?
I do.
Okay, and are you, and I've heard this a lot from a lot of.
Well, but that's because they're being flexible, and what they're saying is, you know, we've been successful working remotely. We're seeing the angst and the anxiety from our employees because it's a bigger picture, which is if you have somebody who's immunocompromised or someone that doesn't want to get the vaccination and they don't want to get in the car and do the commute and they don't want to be exposed, they don't want to have the 3 feet or 6 feet or whatever the current requirements are. So I also see the demographic of people at different stages in their career. I will tell you that I will say that our younger generation, they're like, yeah, I've never been to an office, so I'm good.
Yeah, so, and I should have, I meant to ask, are any of your clients not imposing a vaccine mandate where they are mandating that employees come back to the office at least several days a week?
No.
Of course, for those who are just allowing, flexible, you can work full-time remote if you want to, that's a different story, because then it's obviously a moot point, except where it has become an issue because, for those of you, particularly in the association community, conferences are back, in-person conferences, not fully, but they're definitely back already and continuing to come back. And so there's a lot of staff travel for things like conferences as well as other meetings and other things like that. And so a lot of our clients' vaccine mandates apply not only for when you're coming into the office, but when you're traveling for work as well. Pete, how are you guys?
That's been a hot topic.
All right, well, actually, Sarah, why don't you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I will say from the office perspective, a lot of my clients are not going back, or they're going back with a once a week or as needed. So they're not landing on the full return. And then they've got longer range questions about how to use their space or to divest from it or what have you. But the conferences have been probably the biggest hurdle to get through because you can't control the entire environment. And the other one that's been interesting is actually there was one recently, they had a small, not a full conference, but a small cohort come to their DC facility. It was about 12 to 15 people. And one of the staff members, vaccinated, boosted, actually had COVID leading into it. And so it was that game of the guidelines say this and we're counting days and doing the whole thing, and really landed on the question of, do we just assume that this person should not come in? We might hit the date on the calendar that says they're safe and they've met all the marks, but is it reasonable? Is it sensible? Can we come up with an alternative so that that person does not have to be on site? And the team was able to reshift some responsibilities and cover that, which, just took the stress off of the whole equation, because I think it's, we focus on vaccine, and that's a good thing, but there are still breakthrough cases. The booster conversation goes on. And so it's also that, how do you react when it happens, and what are the parameters on that side of it that keep coming up.
So that's helpful. Follow-up question. So for those of your clients that are mandating some form of return to the office, you have to come in. I've seen everything from 2 days a month, whatever 2 days you want, to 2 days a week, to everything in between. With a lot of flexibility. I literally cannot think of our 500 clients that I don't work with all of them on these HR issues, but I don't know any that are doing it the same way. They're all doing it a little bit differently. And we work on a lot of these policies all the time, so I see it from that vantage point. But for those of your clients that are mandating some form of return to the office and or mandated work travel, for those individuals, those employees that come and request a reasonable accommodation for medical or religious reasons, are you seeing any of your clients that say, you know what, the reasonable accommodation is not what Beth and NIFWF are doing, which is you have to get weekly COVID test and wear a mask whenever you're in common areas in the office? And I guess, Beth, I presume that would work. That would be the case for work travel as well. But are you seeing anywhere you say, you know what, your accommodation can be remote work, like full-time permanent remote work? That is a reasonable accommodation. Again, if that still allows the individual to perform the essential functions of the job and it doesn't pose an undue burden. So for a lot of nonprofit jobs, certainly not all, and not in all cases, but for a lot, that could be, legally it could be an accommodation, but it also can pose some real challenges, hurdles, frustrations. Employees like to see uniformity, people treated equally, similarly situated people treated equally. Now, some employers may say, hey, that person's not vaccinated, the rest of us are, I don't want that person in the office, that's fine by me. Others, though, particularly younger generations, say, wait a second, that's not fair. They decide not to get vaccinated and they get to work from home full time, and we have to come to the office X number of days a week or a month. Are you seeing any of those dynamics? And maybe you're not. I have seen that, and I just am wondering how employers are dealing with that, if that is a reasonable accommodation that's being contemplated. And like Beth said, you're supposed to deal with these on a case-by-case basis. Everyone is supposed to be different, but you still want to generally have some uniformity and consistency in how you carry out these policies.
I will say for the clientele that I'm working with, for the vast majority, there haven't been issues in that space. The one that was interesting is we had a new hire that was not vaccinated. And in that conversation, it was actually because she was immunocompromised with having long COVID, and her doctors had to sign off before she could get vaccinated. And she has since been able to do that. But I think I have not seen that issue. But again, I'm working with a group that by and large are being incredibly flexible about what it means to be back at the office. And more often it's the door is open if you want to come in, and they're doing the small team meetings and that kind of thing. So I've been fortunate to have a pretty easy run on that front. Okay,
PJ, I'm going to ask you a question that it's kind of part on this topic and part it's going to bring us into our next topic of remote work. And like I said, these things overlap. But our second topic is really designed to not be COVID specific, but to be more generally, it's driven by COVID, obviously, but long-term, remote work policies and practices and how are they changing. But first off, if you could briefly tell us how ACC is dealing with return to the office and remote work. And then I want to ask you, do you see this shift to hybrid work, part in person, part remote, as one that will be permanent?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. ACC, we went back the end of February, have been back for a little bit of time now. Staff has had a chance to kind of get settled in. We're back in the office 2 days a week. Staff need to be in between Tuesday and Thursday when their 2 days are. We also have really flexible options for staff as far as they can kind of work out with their team when they're going to be in the office on the days that they're assigned to come in. And I've worked with them to identify what those days look like. But we also do a compressed schedule. So you can work 4 longer days and be off either Friday or Monday. So with those in place, it certainly worked well. And we started off much stricter with the protocols, even though A lot had changed with the CDC. We kind of followed what DC was doing, and then really have just in the past month kind of backed off everything. So we just removed our mask mandate in the office recently, and staff seem to be doing pretty well, but it absolutely has been an adjustment. I think just kind of getting used to doing this again, but doing it on a hybrid basis. And to answer your question, do we see hybrid as something that'll be long-term? Absolutely. I think that it will continue to evolve simply because we're learning and we're trying to learn the best way to do it. And I think that employees have certainly one view about how they think it should be done, and leadership has a different. And I think we're finding a way to get to that common ground. And that's the most important part, I think, is making sure you are listening to one another and seeing how things work and how teams work together. But I do think it is, or a variation of this is definitely something we'll see going forward, because it's kind of like, that great experiment we unintentionally had, and now all of a sudden we can't walk it back. So there are definitely positives and definitely some challenges to both ways of how we worked before and how we work now. But I think overall, it's certainly going to be something positive as we move forward for both organizations and employees.
And are you allowing your employees to work anywhere? Now, granted, if you're having, a policy where you have to come in a certain number of days a week as opposed to full-time remote, it's a whole different construct because, unless someone's going to be flying back and forth across the country every week, they're likely not going to live outside, in your case, DC, Maryland, Virginia area. But for other organizations, and I'll get to that in a minute, that really is an issue. So for yours, I presume that you don't really have the issue of, you have to live within X number of miles of the office or something along those lines.
No, what we did was there were a few states that we were already set up in outside of the DMV, and we decided that we would keep those, but we did decide that we would not go outside of that as far as where employees could live, simply because of the complexities dealing with the employment laws, taxes, everything else that goes along with having to set up in other states. So we did have some employees that were, for various reasons, in those states. They are at some point in the office, whether it's on a quarterly basis, which is what the few of them are pretty much doing, or if they had another arrangement, but they are coming in at some point just to touch base, because from a cultural perspective, to us, it's really important to have that opportunity to collaborate and to be able to do that in person.
Okay, so those are largely, full-time remote folks that just come in whatever quarterly for meetings.
Yes.
Got it. So I want to get to that other issue of, what happens when you have employees in different states. We'll get to that next. But one other question for you. So I know this has been a real challenge during the pandemic, post-pandemic. I've heard this all the time, that so many employees have so much PTO accumulated because they're really not maybe taking it when they should be taking it, right? We've all witnessed it in your organizations and with clients. So how do you think organizations should be looking at PTO in this new virtual / hybrid world going forward? What do you think is a best practice for how to deal with this? How to avoid a situation where, you don't want someone, for instance, to accumulate massive amounts of PTO and then be out of pocket for a long period of time. And then the other situation is a lot of organizations will pay out, accrued leave when someone leaves the organization, and you don't want to be cutting huge checks for accrued leave that perhaps really shouldn't have been accrued to that extent. So how do you deal with it? There are certainly lots of solutions. You can put limits on it. You can put limits on how much time people can take off at any given time, and always subject to approval. But what are some of your suggestions or best practices, or what do you think works well?
Probably the most important is to ensure that leadership's modeling what it is you want employees to be doing, because it's very easy. And we all did it during the pandemic. You just kind of didn't stop working. You take a break here or there, and no one was using their PTO. It is so important for everyone to take that time away and to be able to step back and recharge. And in order to do that, they've got to see it from the top. You've got to be modeling that behavior so that they know it's okay to take that time, and staff know this is our culture and this is how we, are addressing this going forward, that we take our PTO, and when we take it, we are off. Like you said, making sure that there are limits, making sure that there's a limited amount that can roll over each year. When you don't have that, it can become not only an issue for you at the time you could potentially be paying it out, but you're also bringing that cost across on your books. And from a financial perspective, you certainly want to try to limit what that's going to be. But overall, just making sure you're reminding staff that to take that time, and that you're also working with their managers to make sure that they are following up to make sure that everybody is actually taking it. And when you do take it, that you're not working during that time, because it's not going to benefit anyone if you're already burned out or getting to a point where you just need a break and you're still working when you're out. So just that encouragement and really ensuring that staff are taking it and modeling that behavior, I think really helps go a long way for everyone.
That's a great point, and one we should put in the checklist of good suggestions on the mental health part of today's program. Beth, back to you. So with respect to remote work and also with respect to PTO, any suggestions for kind of best practices for how to structure remote work arrangements and also how to deal with these PTO challenges? And I know you guys are a large organization, you have a number of offices across the country, any suggestions for how to deal with different offices, perhaps not all in the same uniform way?
So it's been interesting because during the pandemic, our regional office leases expired. And at that time, we chose not to renew those leases. So all of our regional employees are currently remaining in a remote status. But we are looking that we are going to establish an in-person presence, in an office format soon. We're dealing with our Washington, D.C. office first. As it relates to, remote work, what we've decided to do, and we will apply it equally once we establish the regional office presences, is we're having our team come in 3 days a week and then they have the option to work remotely 2 days of the week. We do have a leave cap, but we've been experiencing the same thing that everyone else appears to be experiencing with the people didn't really take any leave because they couldn't travel. And we are encouraging them to take their leave as they can. So, but we did have a cap in place before this, so that's proven kind of helpful to us.
Okay. Jane, basically same question to you in terms of your clients, and any good suggestions, tips you've seen for both remote work policies and practices, as well as how to deal with PTO and other related issues? Jane, you're on mute. Jane, you're on mute.
So one of my clients has been ahead of the curve in that we decided that we really wanted to focus on our compensation and benefits and make sure that we were very competitive. And at the same time, we also did a review of our culture, because it's bigger than just making sure that you're paying competitively and your benefits and so forth, but your culture. And so we listened to our culture as we were looking at returning to the workplace. We surveyed our staff. We asked for their input. We said we're going to do it gradually. We focused on communicating with them. It was all about, let's tell you what we think we're doing and give us your feedback. And I will say that has gone a long way, but it still doesn't solve our bigger problem. We have a challenge when it comes to making sure that we can recruit or attract, retain, and develop our workforce.
Yeah. And this is going to feed into our third topic, which is the Great Resignation. I think everyone is realizing, I think maybe as PJ asked earlier, do you think that this shift to hybrid work is one that's going to be permanent? If you want to be able to attract and retain good talent, if you just have a policy of there is no hybrid, there is no virtual, it's all in person, full time, every day. I mean, obviously outside of certain types of organizations where you have, classified security issues and other things. But for the typical nonprofit, that's not the case. It's almost impossible to even contemplate being able to attract and retain great talent without having at least some sort of hybrid structure. So and Sarah, I'm going to ask you this, but as you alluded to, or someone alluded to earlier, as a lawyer, I get asked all the time, like, in terms of state laws, how do we know what state laws apply, right? So it varies depending on the type of issue. So like for nonprofits, which are generally nonprofit corporations, the law that applies in terms of things like governance and whatnot is the law of the state in which you are incorporated, regardless of where you're located, right? Other laws apply to where your headquarters office is located, or sometimes other offices. The physical location triggers a number of different state laws, state and local laws and regulations. And on the employment front, the way the construct works is if you have an employee in a given state, that employee is governed by the laws of that state. And if you have, say most of your employees in DC, but then you have, 6 different employees across the country in 6 different states, each of those employees is governed by the employment laws in those states. And as many of you, I think, know, or certainly the group here knows, but as many of you on the webinar may know, state employment laws are very, very different. There's one state that's more different than everyone else. No surprise that's California.
2 or 3.
More protective of employee rights than any other state by far. We actually have some clients that say, have for certain classes of employees gone to full remote work, at least temporarily. And they said you can work from anywhere in the country except California, because the burdens and obligations are just so great on the employer that they don't want to deal with that. And they don't have to, by the way, that is perfectly lawful to do so. You have to treat, employees consistently and objectively, but you can have a policy that states you can work remote anywhere except California. But as we go, to the situation, so many nonprofits had some employees that were full-time remote before the pandemic. We're seeing obviously a lot more now. Some of our clients have gone, like I said, full-time remote, at least for now. But it makes it really, really difficult and burdensome. And it's not just the employment laws, but you have to realize, like in California, the definition of an employee versus an independent contractor, the test there is so much stricter than any other state. It's really difficult to treat most people as independent contractors in California. For non-exempt employees in California, you have to pay overtime for any hour worked over 8 in a day, as opposed to 40 in a week, like it is for most states and at the federal level. But it's not just the employment laws and making sure your employee handbook and everything is tailored to all of those situations, and deciding whether you want to treat different employees differently for certain things, or whether you want to have a lowest common denominator approach, where you look at all of those states and you just figure out whichever one you have to comply with that state, and you make that apply to everyone. There's lots of difficult decisions there. But then you have other things like taxes and registration, corporate registrations, registration for unemployment compensation and workers' comp, and so many other things like that. It's difficult, it's expensive, it's burdensome. For those of you employers that have employees in lots of different states, you're well aware of this. So Sarah, how, and I don't know what the real question is. So I guess the question is, how are your clients dealing with some of these challenges? Any suggestions, especially, you're coordinating not just HR, but finance and IT and all sorts of other things. Suggestions, guidance, best practices here.
Yeah, I'll throw 2 items out there. One, I was very fortunate with one client when they started talking about return to work and what that meant. They had, during pandemic, let employees kind of go wherever they felt safe and comfortable, and ended up with a footprint all over. And then it was the deep conversation of, do we say, okay, it is now time for us to literally return to an office space. And so they were great and got ahead of the curve, and we did the analysis, and we went out and, pulled together a good old fashioned spreadsheet of, if these are your 10 states, what are the key legal considerations or the tax burdens? What defines somebody? I noticed, locally here in the DC area where I sit, DC has a very specific definition of what qualifies as a DC based employee. And it's 50% or more of your time, and that can impact some DC-based taxes and benefits. So even in an area like this, you might find yourself with multi-state with DC, Virginia, and Maryland. But getting ahead of that conversation was great. There have been a few lessons learned as we went. I did have one small group that move forward with a hire outside of the area, and really, and they're a group that I work with just very occasionally, realized quickly that their benefits were not going to be a successful match for that person outside. And so we were very fortunate to connect with an ERISA attorney and draw up an ICHRA plan so they could support some version of benefits out there. So some of it is being able to help your clients react if they find themselves in those sticky situations. From a practical standpoint, though, if you're going to stay dispersed, and you talked about IT and finance and some of those things, it is time to look at not just your handbook policies, but your expense policies, look at your IT, the part that people always forget. If I'm working at home, I'm working. Workers' comp is still in the equation. So are we giving people an allowance for a certain amount of office equipment or support so that they can have a safe work environment? Are we making sure that our employees are up to date on good cybersecurity hygiene? Just because your home is your Wi-Fi secure, are you doing the right things? Are you, being conscious that you're not working at Starbucks on an open system that everybody can tap into? And so I think it's time for a little bit of group think in that for each organization to understand that. PJ had talked about people coming back on a quarterly basis. How does that work? What are the travel plans and structures? Is that a mandatory 4 times a year, or is it mandatory 1 time a year and we would like you to come back the others?
And are you paying for that travel?
Yeah, what is the costing and structure on that? So I think that's one of those times when HR absolutely has to partner with these other departments to define those processes and understand what the outcomes might be.
Yeah. And, from a legal perspective, like I said earlier, to avoid things like discrimination claims, it's really important in the application of all employment policies and practices to do things on an objective and consistent basis, and to treat similarly situated employees on that objective and consistent basis. And that can come up in remote work. It can come up in a lot of other things as well. Just a hornet's nest of really thorny issues there, but it's time to move on to the Great Resignation. I don't even need to explain what this is. Everyone has lived and breathed it. We all have, our clients have. And so I don't want to spend any time explaining the problem. I want to try to find solutions. So I want to ask kind of all of you to just, take a couple minutes to share what are some great ideas, successes you've had in terms of solving, maximizing retention and recruitment, successful retention and recruitment, solving and preventing resignations. Tell us what are some of the things that you guys have done in your organizations or your clients have done that have been successful. Jane, you want to start?
Sure. So what I said earlier is it's all about talent acquisition, development, and retention. And what I'm seeing is that I mentioned earlier that I have a few clients who have a number of positions that we're recruiting for. And what I'm learning is it's not about, how much are you going to pay me? It's more about the whole package. They want to know what's the culture, what are the benefits, am I going to learn, am I going to be developed? But even when you do the above and beyond, we're still competing with everyone on this call because we're all trying to do the same thing. So I think that we are in a new era. And what I keep saying to my clients is, it's no longer an employer's market. It is a applicant's market. And our applicants are saying, but can I work from home? But can I wear my sweats and what's the salary and what are the benefits? So I feel like we are in a new era and all of us on this call are trying to navigate the new era.
Beth, how many open positions are you recruiting for right now?
At this moment in time, it's probably about 8, but we've undergone some really significant.
That's pretty good. Last time I talked to you a couple of weeks ago, it was like 28.
No. That's over the course of this year. I'm now about 30. So, but I can only focus on so many of them, but we really have bolstered the way we're doing our recruiting because with this virtual environment, it just, for me, I've been in the profession long enough that I feel like it's just changed and I'm not as comfortable doing everything virtually. So we're now starting to be able to do a little bit more of virtual. And then now I've had 2 interviews in person, which is great. But we've really started doing a much more team-oriented approach where it used to be just, me, the hiring manager, and maybe one other person. We've started, me and the supervisor will start, or the hiring manager will start. Then we'll bring it to a larger group of the team so that the candidates can get a better feel of who we are, what we're doing, and we can get a better feel if they will fit within this team culture. And it really has proven to be a really great way to do things. We're also trying to, instead of waiting for thank yous, I've noticed that candidates aren't so often giving us thank you notes after interviews, which to me used to be a big, oh, that's kind of a ding. No more. I'm at the point where if we've really enjoyed someone, it's someone we really want to bring on board, I'm sending a thank you note to them and telling them that it's been great meeting them and we think they'd be a great part of our team. So it's really changed the way we're doing things.
And any other kind of opportunities that you've seen kind of related to hiring, beyond what you just talked about, or retention, any new kind of strategy you've employed to try to maximize employee retention?
And so, Jeff, let me respond to what Beth was just saying. I see that all the time. I am hiring for a couple of, I told you already, a lot of positions, and they're not sending the thank you notes.
Mhm.
So I'm sending the thank you note, and then I'm getting ghosted. So that's a whole new level of what we're dealing with, because, I have my hiring managers saying, I want to do 1, 2, 3, like what we did 3 years ago. They have to send a thank you. They have to do this. They have to do that. And all of a sudden they're not. So it's very different than what we have traditionally said was acceptable.
Yeah, so for this, there's a question from the group that's kind of related to this and topic we just talked about, which is kind of unlimited PTO policies. Are you finding, and this is for any of you or your clients, are you finding that you're having to kind of up the ante on benefits, part of the benefits, meaning kind of hybrid or virtual work structures, but other things like offering unlimited PTO? Are you having to, just like, in any competitive market, you have to up your game and up the offer? Are you seeing things like unlimited PTO or other benefits? And how's that working for you?
I'll jump in quickly on that one, and I might even offer a bit of a contrarian view on some of this. I would not advocate unlimited PTO because I think there's unintended consequences where people then don't take leave. There's some pretty good research that it backfires in some ways by being there's some social construct on that. From a regulatory standpoint too, you have to do all kinds of things if you've got sick leave or other things to manage, and it can become a weird fit to have all of these other leaves that you manage and then you're not really looking at the PTO. But I think part of it is it's not necessarily changing the benefits, but becoming more sophisticated about how they're presented to candidates and making sure that the staff and hiring managers actually understand that. I had some interesting conversations going over organizations' benefits in detail with comparison to others, and they're kind of benchmarking for them as employees what they were actually getting. And there were some things particularly around their retirement plan and some of their medical plans that were absolutely extraordinary, and they were just used to it. But I'll also offer, again, kind of the contrarian view on the resignation front. I've heard the phrase "great reshuffle." That people aren't necessarily going to completely new industries or what have you. They're moving around. And one of the things that I've had some conversations with clients about is this an opportunity? Because you've got people who've been here for 20 years and they're not growing and they're not changing, and you can send somebody to a million seminars or get a million certifications or degrees. They're not really changing. They're not fungible in a way. And is it okay for some people to leave? And when we're designing hiring, are we designing it to, do we have some roles that we understand we want turnover in? Do we, as nonprofits, can we look at fellowships or other structures that can help us create some healthy turnover? Is attrition okay sometimes rather than holding on to retention as the primary goal? And part of that, again, is kind of looking around and saying, accepting, okay, if people are going to go, what next? And do we have the chance to, you're not dead to me when you walk out of the door, but rather, hey, great, I'm excited you're going here. We do some projects with that group. We'd love to keep in touch. Or wonderful, you're going to go work for this organization and we've been trying to make some inroads there. We would love to, check in with you once you get your feet under you in 3 to 6 months. Or, please come to our next conference. We'd really love to keep up with you in that space. And can you create that life cycle a little bit?
Yeah, and that works great in kind of a friendly, amicable situation.
Right.
And of course, we've all dealt with, and I deal with it a lot because
Yeah.
clients, I've dealt with you guys come to me where we need a severance agreement, Jeff, drafted, because someone doesn't want to voluntarily go, or they're willing to go, but they're rattling a saber and they're threatening to file a claim against us, and we're going to need to pay some severance to make this happen. Done quite a number of these. In fact, some of these have even come about through the accommodation request because of vaccine mandates. And, in some of my clients, there's, say there's a culture that's very supportive of COVID vaccines, but then you have, 1 or 2 people that are very firmly resistant for a variety of different reasons. And, it turns out, and this has been, I just saw this in probably 6 or 8 different cases. And we worked up severance agreements, negotiated them for all of them, but they really weren't a great fit within the organization to begin with. And this was kind of this surfaced those issues, and it was a good, and look, in the end, it's going to be better for both parties. And we all know when that happens, no one likes to be, forced out of a job. But sometimes it's best for everyone. Any other final comments or suggestions on the Great Resignation? We did have a question from the participants, and maybe PJ, this is for you. They're asking, does anyone for like employees who are largely remote, like the ones that you have, PJ, that existed pre-COVID, and they, you're going to mandate that they come to the office 4 times a year. Are you going to pay for their travel?
No. We made it clear up front that if they, based on the fact that we didn't want to go into the other states, because not only were all the things that we've just talked about, it was cost prohibitive for us. And in order to make sure we stayed within the budget that the budgets that we've established, we knew that if we were going to have employees that were outside of what we were traditionally doing, we wanted to provide that flexibility, obviously retain them. Part of the agreement was that if you're going to remain remote and come into the office 4 times a year, that'll be your responsibility to pay for those costs. Now, we do incentivize staff that are in the DC area coming into the office. We incentivize them by knowing those costs are increased for them coming into the office for, just the fact that expenses have gone up. We do give a stipend to staff that do come into the office, an additional amount every 2 weeks, so that they're in addition to what we'd already given them for transportation. But for anybody that is coming in, they've already got that benefit of being remote, and to come in, that it'll be their responsibility cost-wise.
Got it. And Beth, I know that you have different offices in different parts of the country, and I'm pretty sure I remember that you in the past, even pre-COVID, you set compensation for staff based on the geography of where they live, right? It's going to be competitive, and that's what most organizations do. But now with this whole new wild card of full-time or virtually full-time remote work, and you have people moving, say, from the DC area to other less expensive parts of the country. So someone one of our participants was asking, are you adjusting salaries, for instance, downward for people that are moving to less expensive cost of living areas? Anyone have any? And I have seen that happen with some of our clients. Of course, it's not something that most people like, although if you have a good communication about it, you're upfront, we're saying we're not making you move, but if you want to move, there's a lower cost of living. This is a standard and best practice of employers, and we rely on published salary, compensation data, things like that. Anyone have any experience or insight into that?
I do. So I have a few clients that, we always benchmark our salaries with the experts, which is we outsource and we say, you guys benchmark what we're trying to do and tell us if we're over the market, under the market, but this is where we want to be. And they come back and they say, you know, you're paying competitively because you're in the DMV, but you have this employee in Kansas City or in Pennsylvania. So we've been managing that with our employee population where they're saying, what? I just thought that I had this great salary. And we have to say, you know what, we're going to red circle you because you're working remote and your salary is above where you are working from. But I do think, Jeff, it's going to change because everybody's going to be remote. We are now in the gig economy. We have to be flexible in terms of who we hire. And I'm fine as representing my clients saying, you know what, if you want to get the right talent, then we're going to have to pay for it.
Okay. All right. We have 20 minutes left, so we have 2 more topics to cover, and we're going to cover each in 10 minutes. So keep your answers as succinct as you can. PJ, since you were the one who suggested this topic, I'm going to start with you. Mental health of the workforce. What should employers be taking into consideration to try to ensure that they're offering staff what they need to best address their mental health?
They definitely should make sure they have the resources available on staff, whether it's an employee assistance program, whether it's different wellness events that they offer. But more importantly, they need to make sure that their management has the appropriate training to know what to look for when employees are having a difficult time. And it is really challenging when you're doing that in a hybrid environment. You have the opportunity to see people a little bit more, but when they're virtual, it's harder to pick up on those cues as to when people are struggling. And this is a long-term challenge that HR is going to be dealing with because COVID had a significant impact on everybody. And for a lot of people, that's something that's not going to go away anytime soon. And it's okay. And we'll find ways to deal with that. But I would say really making sure that you know what to look for and then being able to provide the resources to your employees so that they can take the necessary steps, to be able to help them, being empathetic and being patient with staff.
Excellent. Sarah, same question to you.
Yeah, I want to really applaud PJ for your mental health first aid certification. That was one of the notes I had for myself, kind of things to look into. But I think there's also one of the things I noticed for a long time, COVID time, is everybody saying time off, time off, time off. And I think there's a point where, we've already talked about people aren't taking it anyhow. We've got some other issues there. But, within the scope of work, right, within what we can control, there's more and more research bearing out that rather than focusing on time off as a solution, can you do some cross trainings? Can you do some different project structure? Can you give people the opportunity to learn something different and new and create some engagement within the workspace? Now, that's not to take away the impact of personal mental health or family issues or externals, but again, in that space that we control or influence, what can we do to keep people closer and make sure that there's more mental activity and engagement with them within the workspace? And that's something that I think is going to be key in the next year or two.
And Jane, any kind of specific concrete suggestions that you might have to offer? Yeah, you're on mute.
My landline rang, so tell me what the question was so I can answer.
What kind of solutions, ideas have you seen with some of your clients in terms of dealing with mental health challenges for their workforce?
Well, I have, and it's a priority for my clients because we saw when we came out on COVID in February, which turned into March for many, we were ahead of it and we were like, this is not good. The good news is that we made sure that our colleagues were always connected, but the problem is that the problem is that when it came to making sure that we were doing the right thing to support our employees, the employees were all over the place. And so we had to bring it back to culture. Like, we're here to support you. This is what we want to do for you. You need to trust us. We have our what we call chart or collaborative values to make sure that you feel supported.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to kind of take us back for a second before we get to our final topic, and kind of go back to kind of remote work, hybrid work arrangements, and ask one question, a very important one that we neglected to cover earlier. So, and this is a question that comes from someone in the on our webinar today. Considering statistics that show, for example, that employees in marginalized groups are the least likely to want to return to the office due to considerations like discrimination. How do you guys see this impacting kind of the remote work future? How do you see kind of a hybrid future impacting equity? Have you guys in your own organizations experienced these challenges? Have you come up with potential solutions for how to deal with these challenges? I know it's not something that it's a difficult but critically important issue. And so if you just want to talk about kind of the impact, the role of DEI in remote work and hybrid work policies and practices. I'll just open it up to anyone. Sarah?
Yeah, I think there should be some awareness of, to the best of our ability, knowing each other over the last couple of years, to understand people's realities, their home, what their home life is, what their space is, how they occupy that space. I think that's something that should be woven into every aspect of how an organization functions and works. And I think it's the opportunity to kind of meet people where they are and understand how you can support them in that space. In terms of, coming back to the office and those types of things, I will say within the scope of my clientele in this nonprofit area, there is such a high level of compassion and empathy within organizations that I would say that most people have good communications with their teams and understand those pieces. But I think this is a great conversation for organizations, DEI committees, or communities in particular, to look at that organization and how they're functioning and what makes sense. It's a difficult space to navigate, though, and it is that space where you do also have to be respectful of boundaries and understand that, if somebody is reluctant to come back, maybe there's something to explore there and to look into particular and make sure that you understand what that discomfort might be.
Yeah, and I can say from a legal perspective, you always had a call earlier today with a client that actually just got hit, unfortunately, with a lawsuit from a former employee who was terminated. And one of the claims is a discrimination claim. And so my colleague and I had a bunch of the staff from the organization on a Zoom call earlier today. And, we were asking, were there ever any, indicators? Did this person ever say anything? Did you witness any discriminatory comments or practices or things like that? And surprisingly, one of the people, his direct supervisor, said, "Oh yeah, he complained about that all the time, and all of the time." And my colleague and I were a bit blown away. Granted, I don't. It doesn't mean that there was any discriminatory, actions or conduct being taken, but he perceived that to be the case. And anytime that there's a perception that that's the case, the employer needs to do something about it. It's just good, HR management, good employment practices to dig in. And if these issues of remote work and coming back to the office surface issues like that, then you want to dig into it. And you want to dig deeper and understand that and get to the root of the problem and fix it before you get hit with that lawsuit or before you get hit with a threatened EEOC claim or whatever the case may be. Any other thoughts that either of you want to throw in on this topic? If not, let's move on to our final topic then of ironically, as we're on a Zoom call, let's talk about Zoom fatigue. We all know it, we all experience it. But again, what are some good solutions here? What are some good solutions that your organizations have instituted that you've seen or heard others, your clients institute? Give us some good ideas for how to combat Zoom fatigue. Open
Let
it
me
up
go
to you.
first.
Sure, Jen.
So I will tell you that this is a struggle for all of us because, you know, we went from being in person to all of a sudden being on a camera, and everybody is like, I don't want to be on camera. I'm looking at myself. I don't want to look at myself. So we've done everything from let's not be on camera to no camera Monday, Friday to no camera Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But at the same time, we want people to make a choice. Like if you're comfortable being on camera, then do it.
I had one group that I worked with where we had a meeting about meetings, but we dug into we had a really purposeful conversation about what we could practically do, and there were some amazing suggestions. And it's things like schedule a 15-minute meeting. Doesn't have to be an hour. And you know, is there a way to can you manage materials in a way that you can shorten meetings? You know, one of my favorites with clients is I love to set up an HR finance call. It's just, you know, typically I target that as a standing meeting, but the goal is to keep it as short as possible. You know, do we have a list that we can rely on so that that meeting is a 5-minute confirmation that everybody read the list and we don't have any last minute questions or changes on a payroll or benefits issue? I'll also say one of the groups that I work with, they have some of my most favorite staff meetings ever, but they do a lot of games. And so the beginning of a lot of their meetings, they gamify things a little bit. And sometimes it's a getting to know you, sometimes it's random trivia, sometimes it's specific to the organization. And it just kind of gives you a little breather at the beginning. I mean, the business still has to be done, but it does shake things up a little bit and keeps it from just being the, okay, everybody, we're on now, let's get to it. It's also a great way for them to test tools out, which has been kind of neat to see how some of that's shaken out for them as well. So there's some neat ways to do some of that.
Yeah, what was, Sarah, there was a tool that you had mentioned to me, Kahoot?
Yeah.
How does
Yes.
how does that
Kahoot
work?
is great. And it's you can kind of do little mini quizzes and everybody can download the app or just use it for that particular session and do some Q&A. There's another system that I like a lot called Liberating Structures. It's an open source toolkit for meeting management, and they kind of turn meetings inside out. The website, and you can find Liberating Structures. Meetings are they're structured, and it'll tell you how long the process will take, how to organize a room or a group of teams. And sometimes it's things like, you know, how do you plan the worst Zoom meeting ever? And that might, you know, and so you go through all this negative feedback, but they've got a lot of different formulas like that to kind of change problem solving and discussion. So there's some neat plays, games or things that you can do to kind of spin things around a little bit.
Yeah, I personally like one of the suggestions that you made, keep the meeting shorter. That's one of the best ways to cut down on Zoom fatigue, is to not be on Zoom as much. I tend to get the benefit of that as an outside counsel that bills by the hour, because people don't want to unnecessarily extend a meeting with me. I was on one yesterday and we wrapped up like 6 minutes early for a 30-minute meeting, and they were happy because they get billed 6 minutes
6-minute
less.
increments.
But beyond keeping meetings shorter, which we all, I think, would enjoy, Beth, you have any suggestions to offer up here for things that need to be done?
Yeah, I actually had a really interesting suggestion come up just this morning. We were talking about meetings, and we're looking at some swing space and how they're going to get meetings structured, et cetera. And one of the participants actually suggested, she's like, why don't we start meetings at 5 minutes after the hour? Because others were saying they try to end them 10 minutes early, but meetings, unless you're talking to your general counsel, never wrap up 10 minutes early. And in this case, they're saying just start them 5 minutes later. And I thought it was interesting, haven't used it, but I actually might try and employ that myself.
I like that. PJ?
One thing
You
we
guys
haven't done, but I've heard that it has worked well, is that some organizations will actually block a time, either, as Jane was saying, different days, or they'll block a day from 12 to 2, no meetings. So at least you're breaking up a little bit that time frame where it's back to back to back meetings, because with Zoom, it's not as though you have the time, like when you're in the office, to actually get up and walk to a meeting. You could be stuck in the same place for hours on end, as I'm sure everybody's unfortunately probably dealt with. But being able to build in even just that short period of time and then having those breaks certainly have been helpful for people.
And one last question on this topic from the one of the participants. They said, so if you allow people to turn their cameras off for Zoom and other video calls, Teams and whatnot, how do you know that someone's paying attention? How do you know that they're even listening and that they're around? Any ideas, suggestions for how to deal with that challenge while still, giving people some flexibility?
Ask them a question. See if you can get them to respond.
What
to
Sarah
something.
said, I like
Yeah.
that, because that's always, we're all about engagement. So we want to make sure that everybody's engaged, and we want to also give them the opportunity to have flexibility. You don't have to be on camera. You just have to show up, but we want you to be engaged.
Yeah, I will say I do some training occasionally on compliance related issues. And for those calls, I will explain to people why I do want them on the camera. And it's because I'm, scanning the group to make sure that people are nodding or getting the material because it's important. But there are certainly other times that, we all agree cameras are optional and we turn them off, which seems to be useful.
Okay, so we have 4 minutes left. I'm gonna, in 1 minute or less, I'm gonna ask each of you to just wrap up with 60 seconds or less of thought, words of wisdom, concern, hopeful, anything relating to HR challenges facing nonprofit employers these days.
Happy to start. The biggest challenge that I'm having is that I can't find the right candidates. And I think that the rules have changed. It used to be that we said you need 3 years of experience, but now maybe I need to train people.
Mhm.
And I like the way that Beth and Sarah are nodding. PJ probably was too, but that's a challenge. And I'm trying to navigate that. And then the other part of the challenge is that I'm working with many organizations where they want to have that process that worked 3 years ago, which doesn't work anymore. So somebody else can elaborate.
Thanks. Sarah?
Yeah, I'll take my minute. I think there's 3 concepts that are starting to become more prevalent, and it's flexibility, reasonableness, and empathy. And if you can kind of approach things and work with leadership to view policies and decisions in that way, everything's going to change. Reasonable in all aspects, not just the compliance side, but just in dealing with people, and a little empathy, because we're all kind of in these weird spaces now, and can, if we can use that to relate to people beyond, the obvious differences, there's some grace in all of that.
Well said. PJ?
I would say that probably the biggest challenge most of us are dealing with right now, as we've talked about, is dealing with recruitment and retention. That being an area, because it is having such an impact on everything we do and taking us away from those things that we are normally focused on. Everybody's looking to try to find the right way to do it and the best way to do it. Something I would suggest that really it helps you personally know that you're doing everything you can. Reach out to your networks, work with others who are going through the same things, talk with them, find out what's working and what isn't, so that you can certainly come up with other ideas and different things, but also take the time to understand you are definitely doing the best that you can. And we're going to make it through this. This is something that can't last forever, but and we'll get better. It definitely will.
Thank you. And finally, Beth?
So for me, I feel like the next stage in this whole thing is full of opportunity. I mean, yes, we're having recruiting challenges, but I always look at recruiting as an opportunity. And being in the nonprofit sector and with our mission, I'm finding that we're attracting, and I hope many of you are also attracting, new kinds of candidates, people that are really excited to be with your organization and happy to be with you. And I think that's, I love the nonprofit community, and I think that, we're all going to come out of this a lot stronger. It's just, we're going to have to get from here to that, and that'll just be a lot of work, but we'll get through that.
That's great. And to give you the most concrete example, as my our small law firm has grown in the last couple of years, when we were looking to add another attorney last year, I never would have thought pre-pandemic to hire someone outside of the DC area, especially for a smaller law firm. But we ended up hiring my colleague Julie Kulovitz in Chicago, because I realized, wait a second, there's no reason that, and it was a great fit, and she was interested, and everything worked out great, and she's been phenomenal, and the remote aspect has been seamless. But for the pandemic, I never would have thought about that. Our fourth lawyer just happens to be in DC, and she's amazing as well. But point is, the silver linings to everything, including the pandemic, and as we've seen from what you guys just said and in your discussion today, certainly a lot of great ideas that I think are going to make kind of the workplace and the HR environment in nonprofits stronger going forward. So I want to thank all of you for your terrific contributions here today. I know that was a lot of information, everyone, to digest, but hopefully you found it helpful. Beth, Sarah, Jane, PJ, thank you so much. And thank you so much to Donna and Farah for co-hosting today's program. Thank you all for participating. This program was recorded. You will all receive an email in the next few days that has a link to the recording. Feel free to share it with your colleagues and others who you feel might benefit from it. Thank you again very much, and hope to see you at the next Nonprofit Advisory Board webinar. Take care, everyone.